Joining us live now to talk about this, ASPI's Malcolm Davis. Malcolm, good to see you this morning. Thanks as always for your time. So let's start off with your reaction to it.
Look, I think it's an extremely aggressive act. It's very unprofessional, very unsafe, as the Defence Minister Richard Marles was saying yesterday. There's no way that this sort of act could be unintentional or accidental. That fighter pilot in that Chinese J-10 fighter knew exactly what they were doing. They were intending to drop those flares in the flight path of that Seahawk helicopter. And that's an extremely aggressive act. And I think it's particularly significant coming after, supposedly we're meant to be stabilizing the relationship, but we've just had Chief of Navy up in Qingdao for the Western Pacific Naval Symposium talking to the Chinese Navy and supposedly mending fences. And now the Chinese military do this.
Let's talk about the flares themselves, Malcolm. What's behind that tactic, do you think?
It's purely intimidation. It's designed to get that helicopter to divert its flight path. And remember that helicopter and the ship that it was based on, HMAS Hobart, was operating in international airspace over the high seas, over international waters. It was not anywhere near China's airspace. So this was an extremely aggressive act whereby China is trying to intimidate Australia and other navies from staying out of international waters that it ultimately seeks to claim as its own.
Yeah, and this is the second incident that's involved Australia in recent times. Plus, you've got its incident just last week with the Philippines. I mean, are they particularly aggressive at the moment, Malcolm?
They're always particularly aggressive. I think that the Chinese feel that they have an opportunity to push very hard, both in the South China Sea and also now with this incident in the Yellow Sea, where the HMAS Hobart was enforcing sanctions against North Korea. The Chinese are trying to essentially use military force to intimidate and coerce their neighbours into allowing China to control and ultimately claim the high seas, international seas, as their own territorial waters. And that would be an unacceptable threat to international law and order.
So what's the response got to be? I mean, we heard from the Defence Minister Richard Marles last night, harsh words, but the thing is China doesn't care. It just does it anyway.
Exactly. I don't think harsh words or a diplomatic démarche are going to be sufficient on this occasion.
So what should we do?
Look, I think that maybe it's time to start thinking about whether we do carry on with the sort of level of trade that we've got with China at the moment. Selling lobsters and selling wine to China is not worth putting Australian Navy personnel at risk, by basically submitting to China's blackmail, which is what this is. So, in my opinion, what we should be looking at doing is perhaps seeking the removal of some Chinese officials from the Chinese embassy here in Canberra and scaling back our trade with China, maybe cutting down China's access to sending students to Australian universities and tightening up on their ability to invest in Australia's commercial activities.
Okay. Just while we've got a spare minute here, Malcolm, these tensions and pressures in the Middle East. The Israeli Defence Force has announced it's carrying out targeted strikes in southern Gaza this morning. Is this the first step to its campaign, its invasion of Rafah, in your view?
Well, certainly does seem to be. It's very interesting that Hamas have claimed they've accepted the peace deal, but Israel is saying, well, that's not the peace deal we proposed.
Yeah.
So my guess is that these strikes are probably the initial part of that campaign, and assuming that no diplomatic breakthrough occurs that brings Israel back to the table, then Israel will carry on and launch its ground assault into Rafah at some point, probably this week.
Okay. Malcolm Davis, good to chat as always.